July 4th, 1776 is American Independence Day. Yes, when the United States declared its independence from the British Empire. Of course, the British didn't recognize that. They wouldn't recognize it until 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. But how did this happen? How did these colonies, these upstart colonies with very little military power and no naval power, separate itself from the most powerful empire in the world at the time? There's a lot of factors to consider. Let's start with this. The Americans were willing to fight. Despite their weakness, despite the fact they lost battle after battle, were the losers almost every engagement. Bunker Hill, one of the most well-known battles of the war, was an American loss. They caused a lot of casualties to lose, but they did lose nonetheless. So, what happened? How did the British lose this war? Well, when 1781 rolled around, a lot of things had changed. The Americans had stuck around long enough. They started to draw allies. The French, the Dutch, the Spanish, even the Russians to a sort of odd neutral extent, had all allied themselves with the United States, not because they were particularly interested in American independence, but because they didn't like the British. The British were the most powerful empire in the world at this point. They ruled the world, essentially. Pax Britannia. And the other empires didn't really care for that, so they were looking for an excuse to sort of poke a finger right in the British eye. And this was a good opportunity, helping the Americans achieve independence, therefore weakening the British Empire by losing a pretty major colony. So with all these allies on their side, the United States found itself actually winning some battles here and there, and in fact won a big one in October 19th, 1781 at Yorktown. General Cornwallis stumbled right into a trap. The Americans and the French army, along with the French Navy, managed to trap him there and force him and his entire 7,000-man army to surrender to General George Washington, no less. Yes, they were so thoroughly defeated, the French could force Cornwallis to surrender to Washington. That was an embarrassing defeat. This was also 5 years after American independence was declared, so it's clear the war was not going to go away. So the British were left with two options at this point. They could continue to fight a war that seemed fruitless, a war that was now causing others to fight against them. Not only were the French fighting the British in the Americas, they had also brought the fight to the British Isle itself, bombing the British coast. Yes, the British Navy was the strongest in the world, but it couldn't contain the navies of the rest of the world combined, which was pretty much what they were trying to do at this point. So the British were in a very difficult spot, almost a world war, the whole world declaring war on the British. This American war was going to be a much bigger pain than the British ever imagined it to be. So what to do? Well, continuing the war didn't seem like a viable option. George III, King of England, he really wanted to continue to fight, and he encouraged Lord North, who headed up a Tory government at the time, to continue to do so. However, Lord North's government collapsed in 1782, and so the negotiations taking place in Paris took on a different light, as a new Whig government, a more liberal government that favored the Americans, came into power. And they realized something. There were a lot more pros to letting the United States go. Not only would they get the world off their back, not only would they have to stop fighting this feudal war that never seemed to go anywhere or be won, the public would celebrate this because the public in England was tired of the war. They had fatigue. It was tiresome to fight a war you could never win. Also, the British had some realistic expectations at the Treaty of Paris. They realized the United States would still need trading partners. And who better than the British themselves? The British Isle doesn't have a lot of forests, so they don't have a lot of wood, they don't have a lot of coal, they don't have a lot of the other things they needed to bolster their burgeoning industrial revolution at the time, but the United States had a lot of it. So why not allow them their independence, form a trade treaty, and continue to get the things you need from that area, just under a little bit different guise? Yes, the British realized there was a sort of natural alliance between the United States and the British. Now, the French pushed for their own alliance with the United States, but it wasn't as natural. The French kind of had their own supply of things and didn't really need the American trade items, and so it wasn't quite as well fitted. The other powers really didn't care at all about the newly formed country, and so they didn't really make any attempts to influence the Treaty of Paris. Yes, it really came down to the French and the British. And the British had the inside track, already having a relationship with the United States, having been their colonial masters. Now they could be their top trading partner, and that seemed like a vastly more viable option than continue to fight a fruitless war. So though the British were losing, they were winning in a way by getting out of a bad war and pushing for a good trade agreement. Here was the problem. The Napoleonic War sort of stymied what could have been an amiable relationship between the United States and the British. Lots of trade, lots of details, another video for another time. But post-Napoleonic Wars, the United States and Britain did come together in a very natural way and have been actually relatively close allies, especially since the end of the Civil War. So yes, the British lost the American Revolution, but they won, in a way. Allowing the United States to go was the vastly better option. So here you have a nation losing a war, but finding some victory despite the loss. So I hope that gives you some historical perspective.